Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Outliers YouTube channel and our program, Criminal Mischief, the Art and Science of Crime Fiction. I'm your host, DP Lyle. Today, I have a great guest, someone who I recently met and just loved to death, Diane Fanning. Now, let's just throw this out there first. Diane's been an Edgar finalist. I mean, need I say more? That is a great feather in your cap. She's also written 15 true crime books and about 13 crime fiction books. So she's walked both sides of this crime world writing. Uh, she served as a consultant for 48 hours and has been a regular on Deadly Women. She's also been on shows like 2020 and Today and Forensic Files and Biography Channel, Investigation Discovery, one of my favorite, and the BBC. And she lives in Virginia in the shadows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Diane, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Doug. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Well, we have a lot of our students and a lot of writers who are interested in true crime and they're interested in writing true crime, but they don't really know what it's all about, I don't think, and I'm not sure anybody does. It's a whole different world than fiction writing. So how did you get into this world? What led you down this path to get you to become a true crime author?
Well, actually, it started when I was a young child. When I was 9 years old, I lived in a neighborhood that was part suburban and part rural. So you'd have a cluster of houses, then you'd have a field of cows and a field of corn. And I was walking down a hill in that area with my girlfriend, and we were going to the little country store. And a car pulled up and asked for directions. And so Cheryl and I tried to explain to him where he needed to go. And he said, I don't understand. Could you look at my map and show me on my map? So I said, sure. And he opened his car door and I walked up to it. But instead of a map, he was exposing himself. And he grabbed onto my upper arm and tried to pull me into his car. When it felt like I was about to lose that battle. Another car came up over the hill and laid on his horn. And when he did that, the car that had stopped us took off with his door still wide open. And being a big fan of Dragnet, I knew what Sergeant Friday would want me to do. I memorized his license plate. And I went home to my mother and she reported it to the police. Well, 2 days later, they had caught the guy and they found evidence in the trunk of his car that he had sexually assaulted and murdered an 8-year-old the month before. Um, and that pushed me to go into the library, and I had to get special permission at that time to go in the adult section. But I got it and I went in there and I started reading about what caused criminal minds, the psychology and the psychiatry behind it, because I wanted to understand why me and how could anybody do that. And so that was just sort of a hobby on the side for me for a long time. Then one night I was watching 48 Hours, and this little girl came on, Crystal Searles, and she had had a horrific experience where a serial killer came into the home where she was staying, killed her friend right in front of her eyes, and then slit her throat and left her for dead. When she heard the vehicle pull away, she had made the assumption that everyone in the house was dead too, but they were on the other end of the house. So she just got up and started walking towards a neighbor on a gravel road at 4 o'clock in the morning, where there's rattlesnakes and scorpions and all sorts of things that could hurt her. She got to the door of Herb Betts, and Herb was a funny guy. He used to watch Eve coming in from the very beginning. So he'd be up all night watching it arrive in every different country. And he was awake and he came to the door and she motioned for a piece of paper and she said, call the cops, everyone is dead. The first thing Herb did was call the for an ambulance, and then he called the cops. And they airlifted her to San Antonio. And when she got out of surgery, she still couldn't speak because her vocal cords had been severed. In fact, her aorta sheath had been nicked, but not
Ooh.
severed. And she once again motioned for pencil and paper and asked for the police. They came, they brought a forensic artist, and without being able to speak, she still was able to work with the forensic artist so exceptionally well that they knew who it was within an hour and made their plans to arrest him. When I heard her story, it reverberated in my heart. I mean, this was a little kid that had done 10 times, 1,000 times more than what I did, but still her experience was kind of similar. And she stopped a serial killer. And to me, that was extremely important. I had to write her story. So that's what I did the next day. I sat down and I gathered what information I could get about what had happened. And I wrote the first chapter and I sent it off to Jane Distel,
Mhm.
and she worked with me to write a proposal because I'd never written a proposal before. And
Mhm.
once we got that done, she sent it off to publishers, and I got two book offers from two different publishers. Went with St. Martin's, and the rest was history.
Wow. I'm going to ask you, lower your camera just a little bit. We can't see all of you. And we want to, there you go. That's perfect. So, what a chilling story. I mean,
Yeah.
wow. So that's what piqued the interest and got you
Yes.
started down this path. Is that how you come to most of your stories? You'll read something or see something. Where does that spark come from usually?
Usually the spark comes from when would spot a news story and there was something about it that I didn't understand. Maybe a bit of science, maybe a bit of technology, but there was or the method or something like that. I didn't understand it, and that intrigued me. I wanted to learn more. So I'd go after it that way. Many times I'd been asked by my publisher or my agent, look at the story, we think you'll like it. And if I do, I'll grab it. But if not, I'll say I'll pass.
Okay.
Because to me, the most important part of writing the book is twofold. I want to honor the victim and I want to learn something new.
Yeah. That's that's the old thing about write what you know. Now you write what you want to know, and I think
Yes,
that kind of covers that because so 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 you have this idea and you have this story and you have this thing that is this case that has piqued your interest. Now you got to research it. And obviously I'm guessing you go to media sources, you go to internet sources, you go to the police, investigators, whoever you can get to, you go to witnesses and victim's family or victim or whatever. How do you organize all of that and what do you find to be the most valuable source of information for your stories?
the first thing I do is, of course, pull through the pour through the media reports, and my for two main things. One of them is to get names of as many different people as I can,
Right.
and others are to set up uh, parameters around what I need to include and what is just garbage. For example, every media person who's working on a real tight deadline will occasionally make some mistake because they've been misinformed, not because they got it wrong, but because someone lied to them. And so you've got to find a way to sift through all of that. And so once you get all that information and you start calling people, the one of the most important questions I find in an interview, and I leave till the very end, is who else do you think I should talk to?
Yeah.
And then you get names that never popped up in the news, and they are often your most valuable resource. Other people, they can be great or not so great. Like family members and friends, absolutely wonderful if you can get hold of them, if they'll talk to you. But when you look at district attorneys, for example, there was one in Florida for a couple books I wrote that I just was crazy about him because he viewed the Florida Sunshine Laws as once I give it to the defendant, I've given it to the enemy. So why not share it with the world? And so the second defense got anything, I was able to get it. And that was extremely valuable. But most district attorneys are really tight with information, tight with documents and evidence, and it's really difficult to get things out of them until the trial is over. So then actually sitting in on the trial, or back when Court TV was running the full trials, that
Right.
was the best way to get information and to identify people who could be very helpful. And it's like when I did Written in Blood, one of the most best information sources I had was the mother of the prosecuting attorney, because she was in courtroom every single day. And I just sensed she would have stories in her. And so I asked her to go across the street and get a glass of sweet tea with me, um, which is a very Durham kind of thing to do. And she came over and she talked, and I found out backstory about the prosecutor that was absolutely fascinating, and what it shaped with what he became and who he was. And it also led me to different people because she had made friends with a lot of the people in the courtroom. And so she would tell them, talk to Diane. And
Mhm.
so they would. And I got, just reaching out in a friendly sort of way, get you lots of connections. And the other thing is my heavens, you have to be kind to courtroom personnel. Um, I was talking, I mean, just chatting really at the moment to one of the people in the court recorder's office, and another writer came in, and you could see she's getting impatient. She's bouncing around on her feet and stuff. And finally she bursts in and she says, really, I need to get some copies. And to treating the court clerk like a servant. And she turned to her and said, well, ma'am, I'm helping Miss Fanning right now. You're just going to have to wait your turn. So she stomped out. And from that day on, I never even had to ask for copies. I would go after trial was over for the day, and she would hand me copies she'd already made. Instead of charging me, I forget, I think then it was 25 cents a page to run the copies. But she was giving me everything I needed. She let me go in the closet where the evidence was. I mean, it was, if you're kind to people and you treat them like you want to be treated, then they'll give back in kind and
Yeah.
make your job so much easier.
Well, a corollary to that front, Anne Rule was a dear friend, and I loved Annie to death, and miss her, miss her, miss her. But she said, if you want to get sued, write true crime, because she said the story is going to make a lot of people happy and a lot of people mad, and those
Yes.
may be the perpetrator's family, the victim's family, the police, the media. Somebody's going to get upset. Have you interfaced with that or crossed that bridge or had issues with that?
Well, yes, I certainly have. I mean, when I wrote my first book, I uh I was having trouble with this one person I desperately wanted information from, and she said, well, I'm not going to give it to you because I gave stuff to Anne Rule and she never wrote the book. So I thought, okay, I'm going to talk to Anne.
Yeah,
So I
right.
talked to Anne, and what it boiled down to was she said to me, I didn't write that story because it would have been too much work. Because we had 2 decades. of killing spread across the country, and you had to literally go to some of those cities and go to the library and go through the fish files. On the microfiche. And she said, and then she said, and I would love to read your book, but make sure you let me know what chapters the Dardine murders are in, because I don't want to read those. So,
Hmm.
for Anne to say that, they were a lot worse than I thought they were, because I'd never done this before and I had no experience. And she warned me about the possibility of lawsuits. And I did. I had one where I was sued because I thought I was protecting a young woman since she was a minor and I only used her first name, even though I knew her last name. Well, her parents sued me for saying her first name is unusual enough that everybody's going to know it and know who she is. And secondly, it's depriving us of our right to write a book about the case,
Hmm.
which it's not. But then they were suing for some astronomical figure, and it got down to her appearing, the couple appearing on TV, and their last name was revealed, their daughter's first name was revealed, everything was revealed in public. And when that was pointed out to their lawyer by St. Martin's lawyer, they agreed. They said we can take this fight even further, but they're ready to settle and we think we can get it cheap. And I said, well, because the next phase was going to take like 20,000, and it wasn't my money, but still. I said,
Hmm.
okay, do what you can do. And I said, just so I can talk about it, because the suit's been in TV, I mean, in the news, and I want to be able to talk about it. And so they did, and they settled for, I forget the exact amount, but it was under 5,000, which didn't cover much more than the attorney's fees.
Yeah.
And so, and I was able to tell the world that from the six-figure request, they got less than 5,000.
Well, how much time, let's say in your typical story that you're putting together, how much time do you spend doing research and how much time actually writing it? Which one is the most time consuming?
I think the research is probably the most time consuming because unfortunately I have a habit of going down rabbit trails. If
Yeah.
I'm researching something,
Don't
I
we
don't
all? Yeah.
stop when I have what I want. I go, oh wow, this is fascinating. And I keep going and going and going. So yeah, that probably does take more time.
Okay.
And I find the research very pleasurable. Um, and the writing, I really enjoy the writing too. So but maybe it's 50-50, but if
Okay.
not, it leans towards the research side.
When you're doing the research, have you in any of your stories, if you stumbled across something that twisted your whole view of the story, that changed how you were going to put your narrative together, like, oh, now I see something different.
Well, there was the family of Richard Ivanitz was something that wasn't covered in the media. And his mother wasn't mentioned anywhere. I mean, you couldn't find her at all under his name, using his last name. And then I stumbled across a document in Florida dating in the early 90s, that when he was in the Navy and stationed in Florida, and it listed his next of kin as this name I'd never heard of. So the first thing I did was I called the two police departments that were working on the case, and they said they never heard of her either. So I found out actually his mother had legally changed her name,
Hmm.
um, because y- you'll die at this one. She was working as a telephone operator on one of those phone systems for a prison, And this one guy that called her to make calls, she started chatting with him, and he convinced her that he was wrongly convicted of murder. And she ended up visiting him in prison and ultimately marrying him. And everything was all well and good till one visitation when he got mad at her and smacked her good right there in the visitation room. And that's when she started rethinking everything and looking at it in a different way. And she talked to me in great depth about the childhood of this serial killer. And I don't think she would have been as open um, normally. And I don't know what it was that I did differently to make her come out and basically become public again.
Mhm.
But it was very shocking to me that I was able to get her open up that much.
Yeah. Well, when Truman Capote wrote In Cold Blood, one of my favorite all-time books, I've read it 3 times because the writing is masterful and then the
Masterful.
story is
Yes.
compelling. But he was an arrogant prick. Let's just put
Yes,
it that
yes.
way. A great writer, but he was arrogant. And he said that he was changing literature because he was creating a whole new genre called faction. Might call it narrative nonfiction right now, but it's
Yeah.
where uh, obviously fictional elements are brought into a story, and it's kind of like a near miss, if you will. Um, but with true crime, that's a different animal. That's not
Mhm.
where you can create stuff. So how do you, when you approach a story, how do you balance between having a compelling story that keeps the reader interested in driving into the story, but yet be true to the facts of the case?
One of the difficult things, but one thing that drives every kind of writing is dialogue. And so, but you can have, if Jimmy tells you that, well, this is what Johnny said to me. If you can, you check with Johnny. But if not, you find somebody that can back it up. So you can't really take anyone at their word without having someone else who can back up that version of events. And, as far as describing places is an easy thing. But if you're talking about in a historical context, well, that store wasn't on that corner 20 years ago when the crime occurred, so you have to be able to go deep into history to figure out what was true at that time. And I do keep an older set of encyclopedias around because sometimes that's the best place to find some
Right.
stuff.
Just saying people misremember.
People do misremember. Yes, they do.
they think they have the narrative in their head, but uh so uh if you had to go back to one of your books that was published, is there ever a time that you remember that there was a question of someone, law enforcement, victim's family, perpetrators, whatever, that you wish you had asked at the time and it just didn't come up, and now you're thinking about it and it does come up? Oh my goodness, I should have asked that.
I think that probably happens with almost every interview, but
Yeah.
ones that are important. Well, I wish I interviewed Tommy Linsells an awful lot, and on more than 20 occasions. And I got letters from him and everything. And yet now I keep thinking about things I didn't ask him about that are questions that people ask. A lot of it's
Hmm.
people ask me questions. Do you know if Tommy Linzells was in this place at this time? And there are holes in his biography, and there's holes in my book where nobody knows exactly where he is at a particular time. And I didn't really push him on that. And part of the reason was my time was limited, and filling every single gap didn't seem that important. But also the fact that every time he told me something new, I had to find another source to verify it
Yeah,
because, well, psychopaths lie as habit. So it
exactly.
was, you
Part of
know,
the package. Exactly.
yeah, one of the things I talked to the Texas Rangers about it is that one of the things with Trump, I mean, not Trump, excuse me, one of the things with Sells, his giveaway, was that if he told you a story in a concise fashion from beginning to end, you knew it was BS. You knew he heard it from somebody else. But if he told you like the first part of the story here, then the end part, then the middle part, then another middle, and then another, then you knew the mixed up way was how his memory worked. And you could piece it together, and you knew then that at least there was some truth there.
Yeah.
But it's like the thing he told me about his childhood. I could very easily interpret what he told me as an excuse for the horrible things he did. And he just trying to get me to feel sorry for him,
Mm.
which I did. It was horrific. And I felt real bad for that little 8-year-old boy. But I wanted to know if any of it was true. So I
Yeah.
called his mother. And I told her
Mm.
I was just fact checking with her. I told her, gave her all the points that Tommy had given to me, and asked her, I wanted you to tell me what he got wrong. Tell me what isn't true. And she said, well, that was true, but so what? A lot of people had worse childhoods than him, but they don't go out killing people. And the origins of serial killer just popped up into my
Yeah.
head when she said
Exactly.
that. Yes.
Or at least an abused child in some way. Exactly. Um, have you run across things in your research and in talking to people and in the stories and when you're putting things together that you just did not include in the story because they were too disturbing or too inflammatory or just you just didn't want to go there?
Oh
Or
my,
did you feel
yes.
obligated
Yeah.
to do it anyway?
There was one case when I wrote Baby Be Mine about the cesarean abduction story. I went to the town of Skidmore, and we all know it from way back in the 80s. The town all watched while one man was killed. But there was more going on there. Within a 5-year period, I talked to one woman who 3 of her grandchildren had been murdered in one way or the other. One of them had disappeared and was assumed dead. And so I was tracking down those so that to make a full picture of Skidmore. And when I talked to her, she told me different things about that one Brandon and he and what happened with him. And I started digging and I dug really deep and I ran into a state trooper in Missouri who gave me more information and said, we don't have the evidence to nail this guy, but we think he's who killed him. And and I got and found his transcripts of his chat room with a medical student in Alabama, and he was talking about how to dispose of a body so that it will never be found. He was talking about his means of torture, which
Mm.
involved impalement. And he talked about this boy that he had, who was 19, he had abducted him, and that was how he killed him through slow impalement. And he was very graphic, and I think it was the most evil thing I've ever read in my whole life. It made me sick. I would not even share it with my husband, and I did not put the details in the book because they were just flat out disturbed and disgusting. And the worst thing was that although he got busted for child pornography, he'd be out of jail someday. And he was one of those threats to society walking the streets.
Yeah. Well, that brings up the question in your writing and researching and living in this true crime world, has it changed you in a way that you view the world or in the way you view your personal safety? Have you become more on guard, if you were? Has it changed you in any way?
I am far more vigilant when I'm out in public. I know who's around me. I am like got my antenna out for unexpected movement, and I have a level of suspicion that I didn't used to have. And, and some of it's probably good, and some of it might be going a little too far. I try not to be paranoid, but when you hang around with these kind of stories
Right.
and the results of them, it's easy to become that way. But I'm also reminded of how many family members of victims that end up taking what happened and becoming activists and working to make the world
Yes.
better for other people. There's so many good people trying so hard to do good through their pain
Hmm.
that they're heroic.
Yeah,
And
Elizabeth Smart comes to mind. You know
yes,
what
and
she has done with her life after her
yes,
events is outstanding.
and it just it reaff on the one hand, it destroys my faith in humanity, but then I got this other side
Right.
that builds it back up. And
Exactly.
so it's a push and pull all the time.
Yeah.
But then after a while, it gets pretty heavy. That's why I started writing fiction so I could kill whoever I wanted, and nobody would be upset. So because you listen to these people crying, and you have to look at crime scene photos and autopsy photos, and um listen to the arrogance of some killers, particularly when they decide they really want to freak you out.
Hmm.
And so they're really being as graphic as they can. And it's very disturbing. I mean, I was a pretty innocent person when I started in on this. I really was.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't really know evil. I was absolutely shocked. I mean, I thought Sells was the most evil person I ever met. And then I was absolutely shocked when Michael Stone said, "Oh, he's the most honest of all the serial killers he'd ever talked to." And I thought,
Yeah.
wow, that is weird. And he was on the highest in Stone's scale of evil. But Stone said that, and this was something Sells said to me too. He said that he admitted that he liked best to strangle his victims because then he could look them in the eye and see the light of life fade away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said that, and Stone has interviewed hundreds of serial killers, and he said, I have yet to meet another one that would ever admit to that enjoyment.
Right. When they asked Gary Ridgway, why are you different? What makes you different? What do you have that the rest of us don't? Or what do the rest of us have that you don't? And he said very chillingly, that caring thing. And that sums it up right
Yeah,
there. That sums
yeah,
it. I don't
yeah,
care. You know,
yeah,
it's all
yeah.
about me. Yeah. Well,
Oh boy.
if you were going to, if someone came to you and said, Dan, I want to write true crime, what would be the one or two tips you would give them to say, would this is what you have to think about right out of the box?
You have to think about a way to change not who you are, but your approach to every person you interview. You need to treat a police officer very differently than you treat a homemaker whose daughter's just been murdered. You need to distinguish between them and design your questions that way. You need to, if you're writing a news story, sometimes gotcha questions work. But if you're writing something like a book, which is much longer, when you need every detail you can get, you don't ask a gotcha question. Unless it's extremely, extremely important, then you keep it to the very end. And facts are important. One thing that most people don't realize is, you're you're apt to be sued. So it's good to have a established publisher that will back you up when you haven't done anything wrong. And the other important thing is that you can tell the truth the best you know how, and still people will come after you.
Right.
You may be 100% accurate, and you need to be able to take the slings and arrows. And the first thing with any writer is rejection. You need to be able to cope with rejection without being destroyed, and particularly with true crime, because anybody that has a different idea of who committed a crime or have feelings for the person who committed the crime, and they'll go online and they will give you the worst reviews just because they don't agree with you, no matter how good your research is. So you have to be able to take that without falling down in your bed and crying.
Great advice. Great advice. Diane, thank you so much for being here. This has been enlightening, and I'm sure all of my viewers and listeners will think the same thing. And I greatly appreciate your time and your knowledge. And it is astounding the career you've had and what you're able to do. And we look forward to more from you down the road. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. It was a pleasure meeting you the other day, and I
Yep,
hope our paths cross again soon.
they will, I'm certain. Well, that ends this episode of Criminal Mischief, the art and science of crime fiction. And as you know, we'll be back with other episodes. And until then, keep reading, keep writing, keep having fun. And of course, as I always say, try not to get caught.